Hello, everyone. Gabe here from The Wire. Buonasera from the southern coast of Italy. Just want to give you a really brief update on today's events in Israel. Some good news. First of all, the Israeli military announced that they have completely secured the Gaza envelope, the border fence with Gaza and the surrounding communities. There was another attempted infiltration last night of terrorists from Gaza, 70 of them. Those were all neutralized, either killed or captured or driven back into Gaza. At this point, the IDF is saying there may still be some terrorists loose in Israel that they aren't aware of, but for the most part, they've secured the territory, and they have, as I mentioned yesterday, the Knesset has officially declared a state of war. Over 300,000 Israeli reservists have been called up. That's the largest call-up in Israeli military history to prepare for what will, at this point, looks like inevitably be a ground offensive into Gaza. It's just a matter of how and when. Probably within the next day or two is when it will begin. Defense Minister Golan announced that Gaza would be completely cut off, blockaded, no electricity, no food, no water, nothing going in and out as they prepare to send troops in. Obviously, the top priority is to secure the release of hostages. There is some discussion about maybe ongoing talks that may be happening right now where Israeli women and children would be released for Gazan women who are in prison for terrorism in Israel. Unknown at this point whether that's actually true or whether it will happen. But either way, it looks like the IDF is going in. So it's mostly a waiting game. And now at this point, as I mentioned on Twitter, the pogrom is over and the real war begins. So we'll have to wait to see what happens in the next 24 to 48 hours. Along the northern frontier, there was some more back and forth today. A Palestinian faction of PIJ, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, attempted to infiltrate into Israel. Several armed militants attempted to cross the border. They were engaged by the IDF, who's on high alert up now in the north as well, and additional reinforcements are arriving up in the north. To talk a little bit more about what's happening up north, I had a Zoom interview this morning with Devon. She's one of our field team members in Israel. She's been on the ground there for many years and has been there for the past few days as events have unfolded. So I'd like to share with you our Zoom call from earlier today, and she can give you a better perspective on the ground there as she interacts with her Israeli neighbors.
Hey everybody, Gabe here from The Wire. I'm here with a very special guest today. Devon is one of our field team members in northern Israel in the Israeli Golan Heights region. She and I have been interacting a lot over the past 2 or 3 days, obviously, because of events taking place in Israel. Also some excitement up in northern Israel around the border with Lebanon yesterday. Devon she's not Israeli, she's an American, but she is slowly morphing into an Israeli. I believe she's lived in Israel now probably the better part of 5 or 6 years, right, Devon? Ever since the days of Operation Good Neighbor, the Syria project, as Marco calls it. Devon was active as part of that project and has served the Lord in various capacities for FAI in northern Israel since then. I think you were leading the Al Raid Language Institute for a while there and doing some other things as opportunities came up there. So she's a student of both the Arabic and Hebrew languages. She's a great friend. She's a great chef, by the way, and very hospitable and very kind and a great, very intelligent and resourceful individual that I turn to a lot for for information, for conversation, for analysis, for wisdom, for advice. So, Devon, thank you very much for joining me today to talk a little bit about what's going on in Israel.
Gabe, it's a pleasure to be here. I wish it were under different circumstances, but after an intro like that, I've got something to live up to. So I'm happy to be here.
It's all true. I didn't even tell the half of it. So, first of all, Devon, now that you've lived in Israel for most of the last 5 or 6 years, can you just give us a brief background of your time there? What has, you've obviously formed lots of relationships with Israelis. A lot of people are familiar with Marco Moreno, are familiar with maybe some of the other Israelis they've seen in some of the films, but they don't know about many of the relationships that FAI PLT members have had with Israelis over the years, on a daily basis in many different, places and social contexts and so forth. So maybe you could speak a little bit about your day-to-day relationships with Israelis and how that has changed your life and deepened your relationship with the Lord and commitment to the Great Commission there.
When I first came to Israel, it had been after being in Jordan and Syria. So I had come to the Middle East and entered into the Middle Eastern region via these Arab countries. And so coming to Israel was a huge culture shock for me, just because of there's so many things that are diametrically opposite from the Arab world, just on a cultural basis. But as you get to know the Israelis, especially they call Israelis who were born in Israel, they call them sabras, after a kind of, what do you call it, cactus that you would find, meaning that it's prickly on the outside, but very sweet on the inside. And I think that being in Israel is discovering that even though it's not necessarily a place that is immediately understandable to Westerners or even people from many other cultures across the globe, that there's a sweetness to it. There's a strength to it. There's a self-sufficiency and a get-her-done kind of pioneering attitude, especially where I am here in the North. Many people are surprised when I tell them I live in the Golan Heights, and it's a place where there are cowboys, and it's a place where, it's a very rural area, but there's a lot of that pioneering spirit that really was part of the story of the revival of the Israeli state, the revival of the Israeli Commonwealth, that redeemed the land and drained swamps and made the deserts bloom and that sort of thing. So it's an incredible people, and it's a privilege to be here. And as you said, a lot of our day to day is with neighbors and with friends and just regular life, as anyone would have in any other part of the world. And it's really amazing to see how many neighbors check in with you in these kind of crises. Do you have this? Do you have everything you need? Do you, have this supplies in your mahmad, in your bomb shelter, and things like that? And so there's a wonderful sense of kind of camaraderie and unity, even as there's a kind of deep sobriety and still a lot of questions that remain unanswered of how a catastrophe like this could kind of happen.
And which is a perfect segue into my next question. Obviously, events over the past 2 days have mostly been taking place about 400 kilometers south of you, around the Gaza Strip. Israel is a small country and very interconnected. And so the shock waves of something like this obviously will radiate out across the country, and really we're seeing it radiate out across the world right now. So it's been mentioned several times. We've talked about this on the wire. I think Dalton's talked about it. Is this event really can be compared to Israel's 9/11? 700 people murdered, at least 100 to maybe 130 kidnapped and taken as hostages into Gaza. Per capita, that's a scale larger than the number of people than the number of Americans that were killed on 9/11.
It's almost
So
three
this is
9/11s. Yeah.
yeah. So this is a watershed event in Israeli history, and maybe in some ways in world history as well. We're seeing the world begin to react to this in different ways, and it's really changed. It's really going to change the course of things in ways that we can't even probably begin to see yet. So, really quick, first of all, I wanted you to give our watchers, our viewers, a report on things happening up in northern Israel. Yesterday, especially, I know you and I were both surprised that some events kind of took place there. There was a little bit of escalation, but hopefully it's a little calmer now, Lord willing, and doesn't escalate any further. But this is a concern that we've had, that it wouldn't just be Gaza, that we'd see flare-ups in other areas, for instance, in the West Bank, where a lot of the same jihadist organizations are active, or from Lebanese Hezbollah and other Palestinian factions that are in southern Lebanon. So can you talk a little bit about what happened there yesterday and just your experience with it? You could hear things, you were aware of things going on from conversations with other people in the community. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, Gabe, as you said, the events were taking place about 50 years, almost exactly, after the launch of the Yom Kippur War, which was also a war where Israel was taken by surprise. And because of those kind of disconcerting parallels, because in the Yom Kippur War, Israel was also attacked on two fronts. They were attacked at the Suez Canal and the Sinai front, and they were attacked in the Golan. And so because everyone had this kind of sickly sense of deja vu, and because if you watch Israeli news at all, you have been hearing pretty consistently for the last year, at least, year plus, warnings of a multi-front war. Because Iran has so many proxies along different borders around Israel, the sense in Israel has always been it's a matter of time before something ignites and sparks a wildfire that can't be contained to just one front. So on the one hand, there wasn't as much surprise that something did spark, but what was more of a surprise was it was in the south and not in the north. That such a devastating thing came out of Gaza, and so that element of surprise was really sober, because people know that whatever Gaza can do, Hezbollah can do 10 times that. And so even as they are still trying to re-secure the border and retake everything, they've mobilized a huge amount to the north. And the US has brought in an aircraft carrier, and everything is huge amounts of efforts are being spent to de-escalate anything along the Israeli-Lebanon border, because once Hezbollah enters into kind of this Iranian party that's happening in Gaza, then we'll see a completely different situation in terms of scale of casualties and seriousness. And it's already quite serious, so no one wants to see it go any further. So the people in the north, as you said, were watching what was happening in the south with complete horror and disbelief. I don't think if you'd asked anyone the day before if what happened would be possible, if anyone would have thought it would be possible to have that level of intelligence failure paralleled with just a very slow moving reaction from the Israeli side. And so I think that brought a sense of sobriety to the north as well. So people here are very prepared and are very willing to see what any kind of small situation, willing to go the extra mile to kind of de-escalate if possible and take it seriously. So yesterday, everyone was kind of waiting with bated breath to see what Hezbollah would do, because it seems like their opportune window was that morning when Hamas attacked, and they didn't do anything. There was kind of some murmurs of support, some kind of statements that were made, but nothing serious. And then everyone went to sleep. A lot of people in the north went to sleep in their bomb shelters just to be prepared. And then we woke up in the morning, that would be yesterday morning, to hearing some artillery fire. And we weren't sure, is it a military exercise? There's no sirens, but it was Mount Dove, which has been a flashpoint recently with, if anyone's familiar with Hezbollah tents, I don't know, Gabe, if you've done anything on the Hezbollah tents to the wire.
Yeah, we've talked about it a little bit.
Yeah, then your listeners will be familiar. So same place. There's several Israeli military installations. One on Dove, they call it Mount Dove, is specifically for detecting long-range missiles. And those were the areas under attack. And so Israel was a bit concerned if this would signal that there were actually longer range missiles that were going to be brought in. But after kind of a response from Israel, things quieted down. We still have the UN, who is there to monitor southern Lebanon and doing a laughable job. part of you know this, Gabe, part of the ceasefire agreement between Lebanon and Israel was that Lebanon would not arm within a certain distance from their southern. Yeah, they have a demilitarized zone, and they weren't allowed to have weapons there. Well, it's probably the most weaponized, one of the most weaponized borders in the whole world. And so anyway, the UN, though, is still at their posts there, and things haven't really escalated. There's been a couple skirmishes on the border. There was a group of motorcyclists who got really close to the border and had their Hezbollah flags, and they kind of got warning shots from the Israeli side. So little things like that, but nothing too serious. We also did hear a big boom yesterday because there were some drones. We later found out they weren't necessarily from Lebanon or any kind of enemy state, but we had some drones cross into Israeli airspace over the northern border, and a Patriot missile hit them. So it made quite a noise. If you've never heard a Patriot missile before, it makes a big boom. It makes a big boom.
Mm-hmm.
But we've had pretty consistent, for the last 2 days, pretty consistent jets circling.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, on the one hand, in the Yom Kippur War, you can't help but make parallels to it. One of the reasons why Israel was so caught off guard in the Yom Kippur War is because they'd taken out kind of the combined Arab Air Force in '67 in the Six-Day War, and it just utterly demolished it. And so they were they had uncontested air superiority in the region. And it's still the case that they have pretty uncontested air superiority in the region, but don't want to kind of sit on those laurels, I guess you would say, because underestimating that was one of the major problems in the Yom Kippur War, was the surface to air capabilities of the Syrians and the Egyptians.
Yeah, it's certainly even with the war that began yesterday, there's that same sense of we've and this is something that I just assumed as well at this point as well. Gaza is pretty well contained.
Mm.
They have Iron Dome to shoot down rockets. They have found ways to find the tunnels and destroy the tunnels. The best these guys can do is just float explosive balloons over the Gaza fence anymore. Like there's nothing they can really do anymore. And you almost get lulled into the sense that Gaza's not really a threat anymore. And you let your guard down. And so that's, you could say the same thing about the American government intelligence agencies and the American military in 9/11. You could say there's lots of parallels there throughout history. And there are definitely parallels to be drawn there between Yom Kippur and I guess you could call it the Simchat Torah war now is what it is. So, you kind of alluded to this already, but maybe talk a little bit about the reaction that you've seen there in the Golan since Saturday morning from residents there, civilians. There's been a lot of, military activity up there, a lot of residents doing what they can to chip in and help out with this massive, rapid mobilization that the IDF is undergoing at the moment to really defend on all fronts, including the northern front up there. So speak to that for us a couple of minutes. Just what have you seen there in your community over the past couple of days?
Yeah, well, Gabe, as you said, it can really, I think, fairly now. In the beginning, when people were comparing it to Israel's 9/11, I wasn't sure if it was quite the right comparison. And now, after kind of seeing a couple days, first of all, being in Israel myself, seeing all the horrific footage coming out of the south, I think there is just a deep sense of shock. As you're saying, there's kind of an entrenched wisdom that this sort of thing couldn't happen, and the Israelis there's still so many unanswered questions. I think that is also starting to really worry Israelis, as we don't have a clear-cut explanation of why they're so successful in infiltrating this border, of taking over entire communities, bringing back so many hostages. And so I think it brought a real sense of a sobriety to the whole country, because there's often a sense that people are exaggerating a particular threat. And people are like, oh, you're being dramatic. That would never happen. They don't have these capabilities. And I think no one can make that argument anymore.
Yep.
And so I think that after the shock, though, I think one of the really great things in Israel is that because they have a conscription army, and most everyone in Israel, both men and women, will go through the army at some point. There's a very clear-cut way to jump in. And so I think people are very empowered to immediately start helping. Even in my community here, just on the ladies' WhatsApp thread, I got a message saying, hey, we're near several army bases where I live. And because they mobilized so many people, called up so many reserves, and it was completely unforeseen. None of the bases had the food supplies to be able to support all the soldiers who are coming in. So the nearby communities were raising funds, going shopping themselves, and everyone was kind of like, we're at war. We all got to chip in now. And there's infrastructure to do it, which is very nice, because most people know you can immediately go volunteer in the army. You can immediately go volunteer for the police, and they're ready to be able to put you to work. And so it's kind of an all hands on deck feeling in the north right now. And it's just incredible to see all of the soldiers. I went yesterday to do a grocery run, and at a nearby grocery store, get stocked up just in case we need to hunker down for a little while. And there were soldiers as far as the eye could see in the grocery store. And they were all just getting snacks, you know, their Coke and chips and things like that. But it never seen anything like that before. So the North is pretty mobilized. There's a lot of people up here. They're on active alert. And so if Hezbollah had wanted to attack, I think they missed. I mean, who knows what they'll do? Everything is unforeseen up to this point, but I think they missed their window in terms of taking Israel by surprise here in the North.
Absolutely. Element of surprise is gone now,
Completely.
whatever they do. So
Yeah.
great. Well, I'm going to ask you one more question.
Fire
And I just thought of this a couple minutes ago. So
yeah.
what would you like believers outside of Israel to know and to pray for? How do you think it's good for them, and in your perspective and experience, to view this conflict? And what can they be praying for, and how can they be helping? That's a big question that we're getting right now is people want to pray, people want to help, they don't know what to do. So you being on the ground there, what is your answer to them?
I think one of the most encouraging things for me, and I think for Israelis as well, of having talked to a few people, is the outpouring of support from around the world. When I was in Syria, one of the most painful things for the Free Syrian Army and people who were rebelling against the Assad regime was they felt completely forgotten by the Arab world and the broader international community, that no one really cared if they lived or died or what Assad was doing to them. And so when a small group of Christian believers facilitated by the Jewish state walked in and said, "We remember you and we want to help you," it's just those words, even if the help wasn't even materially that helpful, I think went such a long way to people knowing that they weren't forgotten. And I think so if you have anyone that you know in Israel, or even just on social media, because we've already started to see the backlash and the normal talking points from the extreme pro-Palestinian crowd start to make the rounds. I've already seen a lot of anti-Semitic stuff online. So I think making sure that you have a good biblical basis to kind of address those things in love, but also one thing that's been so sobering to me is all of the really propaganda and misrepresentation and just flat out inaccurate reports about what Israel does in the West Bank and in and around Gaza. People will take utter falsehoods and use it to justify what Hamas has done. And so I think that it's very important to actually know how Israel operates in the Palestinian territories. For instance, a lot of people are saying it's your fault for occupying Gaza. And Israel hasn't been occupying Gaza for like 20 years. So it's there's all sorts of ways that people will try to justify Hamas's actions or say that Palestinians are morally justified in this particular action. And I think it's very important to know yourself why that's not true, and to make sure that you're being very discerning as you're reading these different articles. But I would say more than any of that, as you alluded to earlier, Gabe, prayer is so important. Particularly if you could be praying for the the families who have people that are wounded or kidnapped or killed. Just as you were saying, kind of proportionally earlier, we were talking about proportionally, it's several 9/11s for this. We're a country of 9 million people or so, and to have the kind of casualty rates that we have is very devastating, and it means almost everyone has someone that they know who's been hurt or wounded, hurt or kidnapped or killed. So that the Holy Spirit would be very close, the Comforter would be very close to those families at this time. I think that there's also, I always think of Joel Richardson's book, Mystery of Catastrophe, during these times. It's just so perfect. In that teaching, in terms of the gospel has a really unique opportunity to flourish in the midst of catastrophe, because people aren't kind of distracted by the totally frivolous cares of this life. Like, what's important is very clear. And so if people can be praying for that as well, I think that there's also a real sense right now, as really amazing and a military organization as the IDF is, they're not the Messiah of Israel, and there's only one Messiah of Israel, and just for a revelation of that particular Messiah, and also if you can be praying for ongoing wisdom for leaders. Obviously, there was a breakdown in intelligence and in decision making. So, praying for wisdom and leadership at this time. Israel had been going through a period of extreme division before this, and that doesn't go away overnight. And so that there would be able to be kind of a laying down of grievances during this time of emergency for the sake of the country as well. And then, yes, if you could be praying for the northern border as well, for Hezbollah. It's possible, anything's possible, but I would be very surprised if they decide to jump in at this point. But just that the Lord would, in his mercy, keep that front out of this particular
conflict.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, Devon, thank you so much for chatting with us today. Giving us your perspective is very valuable, much appreciated. And yeah, absolutely. So you all heard from the horse's mouth how we can pray, how we can serve. Devon, you're not a horse, but you are a very hardworking laborer.
Oh, thank you.
And I don't know if that would make you an ox, mule, or what that makes you, but you're just a
maybe a
hardworking laborer up there in Israel. So I had to pick the appropriate beast of burden. Maybe a very beautiful, like Arabic horse, black stallion.
You.
I don't know, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, there we go.
Local.
All right, well,
gotta be local.
All right, thanks again, Devon. People, let's continue to pray. Let's continue to watch. And one thing you can pray about is engaging with FAI in our bomb shelter campaign. I've said it multiple times. According to the Israeli government, there are about 50,000 Israelis in the northern Galilee and Golan regions that have no access to a bomb shelter. And as Devon said, and we pray, Lord willing, Hezbollah does not enter this fight in open war this time. But someday it's probably going to happen. And when that day comes, there will be tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of Israelis that need a place to go to take shelter. Right now, many of them don't have that. So we want to begin filling the grains with silos, so to speak, now to get ready for, in the days of plenty, so to speak, to get ready for the days of lack and hardship. So pray about sowing into that important initiative. There will be more updates on that soon from myself, from Dalton, from Marco. Bless you all. Thank you for joining us. Maranatha.
Fair enough.